Jeff Chilton, welcome to the show.
Hey, Garrett, thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute honor to have you on. I really appreciate you being willing to do so. So,
Thank you.
I'd like to preface this episode by saying mushrooms have always been a big part of my life. In my diet, I'm Filipino, and my girlfriend's Filipino Chinese. She makes udon. We had udon last night actually for dinner. So I eat tons of shiitake. I had some shiitake mushroom fries the other day, which I really enjoy. Uh,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
So it's a part of my diet. I've been supplementing, and I recently learned from listening to your interviews that perhaps I was using some inferior products, which I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that. And recently started subscribing to Real Mushrooms, and now I have a monthly supply coming. I've got the five defenders, I've got the reishi, and I've got the chaga, which I've been taking now for a, a handful of days, and I have to say I've been feeling really good. I have digestion problems, and this is anecdotal, but whatever. But I feel better. I notice a difference in my digestion, which is incredible.
Awesome. Awesome. And interestingly enough, a lot of people don't know this about chaga, but chaga, one of the primary uses for it in Russia was for the digestive system.
Really.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Chaga was that was kind of like one of the main things that they utilized it for.
Now it's actually a canker on a birch tree, correct?
Indeed it is. Yes, it's not a true fungus at all. It's not mycelium, it's not mushroom. It's just a manifestation of a fungal disease because that birch tree has been attacked by the fungus itself in a nodus. And so the birch tree is reacting to the fact that inside that trunk the mycelium of the fungus is moving up, moving down, just moving right through it. And at certain points, that tree will react and push out, and this canker forms. And
Fascinating.
there's only about maybe the only person that's ever measured it has a scientist has said there's about 10% of mycelium in that part of the chaga that's underneath that black outer layer. So it's not really much fungal matter there at all.
Wow. Incredible.
Yeah, I know. And look, can you imagine selling something? Oh, we're going to sell you a nice canker.
Yeah.
Not going to work too well, right? So people call it a mushroom, and it gets kind of sold as a mushroom, but no, it's not a sclerotia, it's not mycelium, it's not a mushroom, it's a canker.
Okay. But it is a fungus of
Well,
some
it's
sort.
it's a manifestation of a fungal disease.
Okay, understood.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and it's like, yeah, how do you sort of like explain that to people in some ways? But that's what it is. And look, chaga is one of the most gnarly things you've ever seen, right? It's not like I'm going to go out and search for cool looking mushrooms with a stem and a cap and all of that. No, it's that gnarly black growth that's on the outside of this tree, and you're just like, God, what is that?
Sure. Yeah. So, could we start with some basics and, maybe talk about some of your credentials, your studies, what brought you to the field of mycology? Is it ethnomycology or
Well, yeah, yeah. I'll talk a little bit about that. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Washington State. It's called the Evergreen State. The reason is that we've got vast green forests. We've got lots of lakes and waters, but it rains a lot.
Mm,
Well, so we also have one of the best climates in the world for wild mushrooms. So it's a fabulous place for wild mushrooms. They were there growing up. I got to go out and hunt for wild mushrooms. And then when I went to university at the University of Washington, uh, my field of study was actually anthropology.
okay.
I was so interested in other cultures,
Yeah.
how they did things. I mean, look, in the 60s, there was a lot of pushback against the culture that was, I mean, you can imagine it was a very straight laced kind of culture. So
Sure.
a lot of pushback. And part of that was looking at how other cultures operated and what was going on. And um, I also took courses in mycology,
Mhm.
and that led me right into the use of mushrooms in shamanic purposes, like down in Mexico, and also the fact that information was coming out about the use of mushrooms in prehistory back
Mm-hmm.
in the Middle East, back in India, and all these other places. And so it's just like, God, that is so interesting. So I put those together,
Mm-hmm.
and that's ethnomycology, which is essentially the study of mushrooms for food, for medicine, and in shamanic purposes. And so they didn't have a department of ethnomycology. That was just me putting these two together.
Sure.
And then once I left university in 1971, I went to Mexico, and I was down there for a year and a half. I lived in Mexico for a year and a half. And part of that was on the mushroom trail.
Mm.
So I was down in Mexico, back up in the mountains, um, finding and talking to people about mushrooms, taking mushrooms, of course, and that was kind of like the way that I kind of terminated my studies, so to speak. And then when I got back to the U.S., it's like, who's got a job for somebody with a degree in anthropology?
Sure. Yeah.
Nobody. So I thought, man, I would love to learn how to grow mushrooms. That would be so interesting and cool.
Yeah.
So I went to the only mushroom farm in Washington State, in Olympia, Washington, got a job. I was there for the next 10 years, literally living with mushrooms. It was amazing.
Beautiful. So, what originally drew you to that? Was it seeing them in habitat when you were younger?
Well, you know what? That's interesting because, there's a couple of things I would say. One of which was I went to high school in Phoenix, Arizona,
Okay.
and so left the Pacific Northwest in 1960. Down here, I'm in Arizona in a desert,
Uh
right?
huh.
There's no mushrooms in Arizona, but I have friends while I'm down there, while I'm like between junior and senior year. They go down to Mexico City to what's called the University of the Americas, which is a really cool summer school that they do.
Mm-hmm.
And my best friend comes back, and I'm so jealous. I want to go down so bad, but I can't. Instead, I'm working, working for the summer. He's down there. He comes back. He says, "Oh man, it was amazing. And while I was there, actually, I took these mushrooms."
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? Tells me about this. And that was one of the things, too, that just stuck in my mind, because right at that point in time, 64, 65, small groups of us were starting to, let's just say, experiment with cannabis, and then going into university, where all of a sudden you've got cannabis, you've got LSD, you've got all sorts of things going on.
Sure.
So that was a big spark for me. And
Yeah.
that ultimately was like, led me into the whole thing of like, okay, how are they using these mushrooms? And there's people writing books about it. And all of a sudden this information was coming out. Think about it for a second, especially with the psilocybe mushrooms, is for at least 500 years, the use of psilocybe mushrooms in Mexico, for example, or worldwide, was pretty much just nobody really knew about it at all.
Sure.
And then a man called Gordon Wasson goes down to Mexico with a French mycologist, because they've heard about them
Mm-hmm.
being used back in the mountains by indigenous people,
Mm-hmm.
in this case, the Mazatecs and Zapotecs down in Oaxaca. And for 5 years during the rainy season, they go down, they collect all of these psilocybe mushrooms, they catalog them, and they actually take part in a couple of the ritual and ceremonies,
Great.
the veladas, they call them,
Mm.
write about it, and produce a lot of information about it, which all of a sudden, my God, they tell the world, hey, this is still going on. And so you're like, okay, yeah, 500 years there, but much longer than that ultimately.
Mm.
Thousands of years. Let's just say from AD 100 forward, all of that is being now kind of censored in a way.
Sure.
So that information of psychoactive mushroom use, it's nowhere. We don't learn about it or anything until all of a sudden in the 50s and 60s, it emerges and people are just like, oh, wow, this is unbelievable. And you mean that these things are being used in not just religion, but in healing? And that's what they're using them for down in Mexico is the curanderas are using it for healing. They're
Sure.
using it in ceremonies. And the interesting part about that is they actually have the patient taking the mushrooms as well as the curandera.
Sure.
And then she's trying to divine what is it, what is wrong with this person, what is the illness, how can we possibly treat them. And this is a part of native healing down there.
Yeah. Now, would a good example of somebody like that be Maria Sabina?
Well, yes, exactly. She's the most famous one. I mean, Maria Sabina in Huautla down there, and that's who Gordon Wasson, one of his, in fact, his major contacts was Maria Sabina.
Okay.
And she now is essentially in Mexico. She is considered a saint.
Sure.
She is very famous. And what's really interesting is that because of Wasson and because of that knowledge getting out in 1967, there was a flood of gringos heading down to Mexico, back up into the Mazatec area, looking not only for her but for the mushrooms. I even had lots of friends that were going down there at the time because they were going down to Mexico and they'd go up there during the rainy season and get mushrooms. So the Mexican government actually sealed off the whole area. And there's only a couple of roads going in there.
Wow.
When Wasson went in the 50s, you had to go in on horseback. Can you imagine? That's how remote these areas. You had to go in on horseback.
Wow.
By the time the 60s rolled around, they actually had a dirt road that you could go in and vehicles could make it in. But anyway, they sealed it off. The army went into the area. They rounded up every single gringo and deported them all. And then for the next 10 years, they had army checkpoints
Wow.
at all roads going in, and they allowed no gringos in at that point. So you literally had to sneak in if you wanted to get in. And look, can you imagine all of a sudden you've got like hundreds, thousands of young people flooding into an area and they're looking for mushrooms, they're eating mushrooms, they're walking around your neighborhood stoned.
Yeah.
And it's not a cool thing, right?
Right.
And the other thing that you have to remember that was going on in the 60s is there was a number of books written by a man named Carlos Castaneda.
Mm-hmm.
And he had met a shaman, a Yaqui shaman named Don Juan. And so these stories were just fascinating.
Yeah.
And it was very popular. And so during that period, anybody that was taking, whether it be LSD or mushrooms or peyote or anything like that, you have no guide.
Yeah.
You have no mentor. You are just moving in and it's unexplored territory.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, imagine that. I mean, unexplored territory. We don't have like, oh yeah, we're going to go to the TP and we've got a fire circle that night and everybody's going to come in and it's all going to be well organized to where we can have a really high experience without any distractions.
Sure.
That was not going on in the 60s. So it was really very different in that sense. So
yeah. And now that's something that's becoming a little more prevalent, whether it be clinical settings or even shamanistic settings within the States. And we know so much today because of your era, especially, and all the studying that was done then. I mean, with the end-of-life therapy, with the depression, all these breakthroughs with psilocybin and other psychedelic substances, which is amazing. You know, we're really headed on a great path, I feel like.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, we have practitioners now here in Canada that can get a license to basically give psilocybin to their patients. And these are mostly psychiatrists and psychologists and so forth. So it's happening here in Canada in
Great.
that way. And it's great. And, also people are much more informed now about how to use them. And so there are groups all over North America that have come together and doing it in a proper way. And look, I'm not opposed to the use for recreational purposes. I'm not.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it's like anything. You should be informed
Yes.
about what the best way to do this is.
Yes.
It's just like nobody informs anybody about how to drink alcohol, right? You just sort of pick it up from the culture.
Hmm.
Um, but a lot of people are misusing it. So really, education,
Sure.
whether it be recreational or using it in a different kind of therapeutic setting, it is really critical and important. And so times have changed, and we are at a point now where I think we're moving absolutely in the right direction. And I've just got my fingers crossed that we can carry on like that, and the door won't close again.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I can agree with you more. I wish there had been more education for somebody like me when I was growing up, and now that we're rounding this corner, I find more and more people becoming interested not only in the psychedelic mushrooms, but in these other mushrooms and these other psychedelic compounds. I mean, I myself participated in MAPS. I'm sure you're familiar with Rick Doblin. I'm actually in the MDMA study for
Oh, cool.
PTSD. Yeah, I just
Wow,
finished. I
cool.
had my third medicine session just about a month ago, and I can't openly speak about what the results have been, but man, the results are published. You can see.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so I feel very blessed to have been able to participate in that, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what's going to become of this with the clinics, and and an opportunity like this is a great way for regular day-to-day people to hear about it from a perspective of like yours, a scientific perspective even, where it's
Yeah,
not so
yeah.
taboo.
I know. And I was telling you earlier how, look, during the 60s and beyond, it was all illegal and it was made illegal. Cannabis was already illegal. Mushrooms were made illegal, just like LSD was made illegal. And so everybody who was taking part in it were outlaws, and
Mm,
and people were going to jail. And it was just really a travesty. Rather than going, okay, we should educate, instead they came right up with this scare campaign. That was
mm-hmm.
back in the reefer madness days and stuff like that. And that's one of the things that you always have to remember about governments and the people that rule us is fear is what they use in all sorts of ways to keep us in a certain lane and not be thinking outside of the lane or acting outside of the way they want us to act.
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. So, could you bring me back to when you were living amongst the mushrooms and what that was like? And I know that you were cultivating quite a large quantity of mushrooms, correct?
Well, this was a very big mushroom farm. It was like 200 employees, and we every week we would put in approximately 6 new crops. Okay, and so when you're growing mushroom commercially, especially large scale, you have a cycle that everything's on. So what that means is that we'll put in 6 new houses every week, and we'll throw out 6 houses that are finished the cycle. And the cycle is a 90-day cycle.
Yeah.
So, I mean, imagine this for a minute. We were producing every week 320 tons
Wow.
of compost.
Oh, just
I mean,
compost.
just compost, which is the substrate for these
Yeah.
mushrooms. 320 tons of this stuff. I mean, we had compost piles that were literally 6 feet wide, 6 feet tall, and maybe about 200 feet long.
Wow.
And we had machines that would roll through those things and turn them, because they have to be turned every let's say 3 or 4 days, or else they will go anaerobic, and we want an aerobic composting. And so it was a very big farm. We had 100 harvesters. One of the things I tell people is every mushroom you've ever eaten has been harvested by hand.
Yes.
Imagine that. every single one, every one of these houses that we had, every crop was going to be producing about 20,000 pounds of fresh mushrooms.
Wow.
And that 20,000 pounds probably was 1 million mushrooms.
Wow.
So what's going on this mushroom farm is literally people are there every single day harvesting the mushrooms. Mushrooms never sleep. They keep growing. We're giving them the best food they've ever eaten. We're giving them perfect conditions for growing. And so they just keep growing. And so you've got to get in there and harvest them every day, or else what happens is they mature, and then that mature mushroom is not worth as much as the button mushroom. And the interesting thing about the button mushroom is and this is Agaricus bisporus, the reason it's a button is because it's got great shelf life.
Mm.
Okay, you can put that out there and it'll hold on the shelf for 3, 4, 5 days. Fine. And I tell people this sometimes too. They go, oh, yeah, okay, we've got that button mushroom, and then we've got the portobello, and then we've got the cremini. And I say, yeah, that's right. The portobello is just a button mushroom that they've allowed to mature to become a very, very big cap.
That makes
And the
sense.
cremini is nothing more than the agaricus, but it's just a different strain that they've developed with a brown cap. So they've got strains that are whites, they're off whites, they're creams, they're browns. All three of those are the same species, Agaricus bisporus.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Yeah. But again, especially with those portobellos, they've just allowed them, they basically, like if you've got a mushroom bed and you have, let's just say 1,000 small little initial startings, if you allow them all to grow up, they'll all grow up to be a certain size. But if you cut that back to only 100, you'll get now, instead of 1,000 of, let's say, normal size, you'll get 100 that are bigger, because all of a sudden these 100 mushrooms have that much more food. And then you allow them to mature and they grow up and they turn out to be these platters. I mean, those portobellos are huge.
Yes. Cool. So now you were studying shiitake and other species as well at that time too, correct?
Oh man, I was so lucky. We had a Japanese scientist there, Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Urayama, and he was our research and development head. And he was growing shiitake, he was growing oyster, and he was growing enoki mushrooms. And I was able to be a part of that. At this point in time, I'm like the production manager,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm feeding him, people to work on his project and things like that. And so I'm watching all of this happen. And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm learning how to grow other species of mushrooms. I was totally stoked on it. And not only that, think about it for a minute. Shiitake to me is the number one edible mushroom. I
Yes.
love shiitake. I was eating fresh shiitake mushrooms in the 1970s. Nobody else in North America had access to fresh shiitake. And there it was on this farm that I'm working on. I've got fresh shiitake, and I'm just like, man, how lucky. And seeing how they're growing. So part of being there was just diving in as deeply as possible to how to grow all different species of mushrooms.
Sure.
And so that ultimately led to writing the book, The Mushroom Cultivator, which
I have here.
yeah, which was published in 1983. Can you imagine? And it still sells 5,000 copies today. It's
Wow.
incredible. Yeah, I know. And that book gives instructions for people at home to do small crops of different edibles. We even have information in there to grow psilocybes as well. So
Yes.
a great book that kind of, the thing about that book is, like, up to that point, people at home didn't know a lot about small crops of mushrooms. People growing psilocybes were growing them in mason jars and small things, and would be had growing in all sorts of weird ways. And that book really kind of opened it up and showed people how to grow them in a much more, let's just say, professional way, or in a way that professional cultivators would
Sure.
do it, rather than these other methods, which they worked, but not really all that well.
Yeah. Jeff, I have to say it's incredibly detailed. I mean, even down to potential problems that you can run into. There's photographs of every different kind of mycelium and from every stage of life. I've learned so much just from reading it, honestly. I mean, I had no idea that mushrooms broke off from algae. And it makes sense because I take an algae beta glucan capsule, and you get beta glucans from mushrooms as well,
Yes, yes,
correct?
indeed, indeed. That's right. Yes.
Fascinating stuff, man.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it was fun writing that book, and we were growing all sorts of different mushrooms and using different substrates, and my 10 years of experience basically at the commercial mushroom farm was very important in making that happen. So it was a fun book to write. And it's funny because I just looked at it yesterday and the day before. I don't look at it very often, right? But I look at it. Oh yeah, let me just take a look. I went, oh man, really? You put? Oh wow, wow, this looks pretty good.
Still holds up.
Still holds up. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's a great book for somebody wanting to just get into small scale cultivation. And look, it's commercially, when you're looking at growing mushrooms for food, it's not an easy proposition. Lots of
Mm.
small farms out there, and look, anybody who's doing it on a small scale is making about 250 an hour. You have to get up to a certain level
Sure.
before you can actually make any money. Because look, like I was telling you, mushrooms don't sleep.
Yeah.
You not only that, when you're taking your product, your fresh mushrooms out to the market, they're like, okay, dude, that's great. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next week, right? You gotta you
Demand.
yeah, you gotta have them out because I'm giving you shelf space. You better bring them in, or else no, it's not going to work for us.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. You have to have them on a schedule. You have to have them constantly cropping. That means you can't leave them alone. So
No.
any small cultivator, I have so much respect for them because believe me, they are working like crazy, and they have a day job, of course, too,
Hmm.
and just to keep those mushrooms rolling until maybe they reach a certain scale where they can actually make a profit.
Yeah. Now it even outlines how to build your own room, whether that be in a closet or in a pantry, which is really helpful. Uh,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
really excited to dig deeper into that as I expand because I'm using PF Tech and I'm very novice, just getting started and really learning. And I'm excited to do the agar and all those things. So yeah, this is a great contribution. And how long did it take you to put this together? I mean, it's huge.
Well, I think we were working on it for about 2 years for sure of work to put it all together, and get the photos, and then get it off to production and all that. I mean, that book, actually, it was interesting because um, that's 1981, 82, and we actually had a computer then. A word
Was it giant?
processor. Yeah, it was a Radio Shack, a TRS-80, if I remember correctly, and it was floppy disks and
Sure.
all of that crap. I mean, otherwise it would have been wow. So it was ultimately able to give that to the production people in a digital format, and they were set up to do that. And one of the very first probably books out there that was actually done that way.
Wow. Wow. So can you tell me about some of these what brought you to the supplement realm and maybe some of the health benefits around some of these supplements?
Sure. Well, part of my studies at university, and then while I was at the mushroom farm, was learning about what medicinal mushrooms. Oh my God, that is really cool. I mean, I thought the only medicinal mushrooms were like psilocybes, but no, it's like, oh wow, shiitake, maitake, reishi. God, it was just like fascinating. And look, I was telling you about the fact that being a mushroom grower, you're a babysitter. You're tied to that crop. And in the 80s, after I left the mushroom farm, I tried it for a while, having a small farm, but I realized, you know what, this is just too much and too difficult, and I would have to borrow a lot of money to build up the whole thing. And so I thought, you know what? Medicinal mushrooms sound really interesting, and I'd love to get into that. In 1989, I went to an international conference on mushrooms in China. And at that point in time, it was just like the whole world opened up to me
Mm,
because China is where it all started.
mm.
That's where mushroom growing started. That's where mushrooms have been used as medicine for thousands of years,
Yes.
traditional Chinese medicine. And so I was able to make contacts there. I traveled all throughout China during the 1990s. I went to farms, I went to research institutes, I went to conferences, I saw processors. And in 1989, that same year, I started my business, Nammex,
Mm,
which was a business to sell medicinal mushrooms into the supplement industry. And look, Garrett, it's like no company in 1989 had a mushroom product in their supplement line. It's all green herbs, right?
sure.
And even back then, it was very unsophisticated. It was like people, oh, yeah, okay, we're going to just grind up this particular herb and put it in capsules and put it out there. And so, very simplistic, very unsophisticated. But there I am. I'm trying to convince these same people. Have you ever heard of reishi mushroom? Have you ever heard of medicinal mushrooms? No, nobody had.
Mm-hmm.
So there I am walking around a trade show in Los Angeles, Natural Foods Expo, trying to interest people in mushrooms. And they're just like, there's no demand. Nobody's nobody's looking for these things. Why should we put them out? And
Mm,
and so all through the 90s, I was essentially trying to educate people
sure.
about the benefits of medicinal mushrooms. And let me just start here on it because it's kind of interesting. What is this organism that we call a mushroom?
Mm,
Well, in the supplement industry, one of the important things here is a plant part.
yes.
So if I'm putting out a supplement, if it's ginseng, it's the root. If it's ginkgo, it's the leaf. It could be an echinacea flower. So the plant part is super important because different parts of that plant have different amounts of the medicinal compounds.
Mm-hmm.
No different with what we would call a mushroom. So the way this works is and this is something that's so cool. It's like, how do you grow mushrooms? They don't have seeds. What am I supposed to do? It's like, how do I plant them? They don't have a seed. Well, okay, mushrooms have spores. We
Mm-hmm.
don't use spores as the seeds, but the spore in nature, it goes out, it's onto the ground, it's in a piece of wood, and when conditions are right, the spore will germinate. It will germinate into a very fine filament called a hypha. When multiple of those filaments come together, they'll form a network. That network is called mycelium.
Mm-hmm.
We don't normally ever see the mycelium when we're walking around, right? I mean, it's like, you know how it is. You're walking, cruising along, and then all of a sudden you see a mushroom and going, damn, where'd that come from?
Right.
It's like, what? It's not like a tree and it's like, oh, yeah, the mushroom tree. I'm going to pick a mushroom,
Yeah.
right? It's like, where'd that come from? Well, that mycelium is embedded in its substrate. And so there it is. It's underground. If you actually were to pick the mushroom properly and pop it all out and look down where it came out, you can see there's a very sort of fuzzy whitish growth, and that's the mycelium. It looks like a mold
Mm-hmm.
actually, and molds are fungi. So you have this mycelium, and the cool thing about fungal mycelium is that it is one of nature's decomposers. It's out there breaking down all this organic matter. And if it wasn't out there helping that organic matter to break down, we would be up to here in leaves, in branches, in plants that are annual plants. So it's part of that cycle, along with bacteria and bugs and all sorts of things, to break all that down.
Mm-hmm.
When conditions are right, that mycelial network, which has built up reserves of energy while it's consuming all of this, up pops a mushroom.
Hmm.
And that mushroom will go through its different stages, from just a tiny, what we call a pinhead, to a button, then to kind of start to mature until the stem's up, the cap opens up underneath of the gills, out come the spores. That completes the life cycle.
The gills.
So what's that?
The gills. I'm fascinated by the fact that they have gills.
The
Sorry,
gills.
continue.
Gills, yeah, that's kind of cool, isn't it? And if you look at that, it's like, wow, all of these, they're kind of plate-like in the sense of, okay, they've got a lot of surface area, and they're billions of spores come out of one mushroom.
Wow.
Billions. In fact, in China today, they actually gather the spores of reishi mushrooms and they collect them in the reishi farms, and one mushroom can produce as much as 400 grams. That's almost a pound of spores.
Wow.
From one mushroom. It is insane. so at any rate, the idea here is that we have three plant parts. We have spore, we have mycelium, we have mushrooms. So when we're talking what we call mushrooms, well, that's one plant part of this fungal organism. And that's important because when it comes to supplements, ultimately, okay, what is your supplement made of? Is it made of a genuine mushroom, or is it mycelium? Is it spore? Because all of these have been utilized in the supplement industry. Of course, mycelium, until very recently, it was never used in traditional Chinese medicine, for one. What do? You go out there, you're digging up, mycelium and trying to separate all of the dirt from it and all that. No, you can't do that. You can't do that. So mushrooms, the mushroom itself has been used in traditional Chinese medicine for thousands of years. And the way they normally use it is in a water extract. That's traditional Chinese medicine, water extracts. They're just like, here's your little bag of herbs, throw it into the pot, boil it up, drink it if you can without choking on it. It's like, have you ever actually tasted a reishi mushroom?
Yes, in the tea form.
It's bitter.
Yeah.
It's very, very bitter. So at any rate, that's what we will do, is we will actually produce extracts of the mushrooms that we grow, and we just grow the mushroom. But again, the way that process works is, earlier I said, well, what do you use as your seed for mushrooms? Well, interestingly enough, what's used for seed is live mycelium. Yeah, it's really cool. They use live mycelium, but the way they do that is they will sterilize something, and that could be a grain or it could be sawdust, but they sterilize something that acts as a carrier for that mycelium. So that, just think about it, you've got a gallon jar of sterilized grain covered with mycelium. When you want to plant your mushroom substrate, which, let's just say in the compost, like on the agaricus farm, well, now in that jar, we've got a couple thousand different grains with mycelium. So you can think of almost every grain as being like a seed.
Okay.
So we can mix up all of that compost with all of these grains. And then when we put that bed in for incubation, each one of those grains, the mycelium grows off of it. They all come together and they colonize that substrate. So that's what we would call mushroom spawn. Yeah. But here's one of the things that happens in the supplement market, which is insane, is that companies out there produce this mushroom spawn,
Mm-hmm.
or what I call myceliated grain,
Mm-hmm.
and they grow the mycelium on it, and then they will dry it, grind it to a powder, grain and all, and they've been selling this stuff as mushroom,
Mm.
and they've been doing that for 15 years now.
Mm.
And when you test that, and the most important compound in mushrooms are beta glucans.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the cell wall of mushrooms. 50% of the cell wall of a mushroom is made up of beta glucans. Mycelium, beta glucans in the cell wall as well. We can test products. In 2015, using what's called the Megazyme test, I tested 95 different samples, 40 of which were products that were this myceliated grain product.
Mm.
Now, dude, I know this question you're gonna be able to answer. Do you know what tempeh is?
Tempeh, yeah, it's like a meat, vegan type of meat, correct?
Yeah. Tempeh is actually
It's not really meat, but it's plant matter.
no, yeah, that's right. You know what tempeh is? Tempeh is actually cooked soybeans
Mm-hmm.
with mycelium grown on it,
Mm.
fungal mycelium. So it's really kind of a cool product. It's and it is like meat. It's a cake. You slice it up. You can fry it. You can do all sorts of things with it. It's really cool. Well, it's mostly soybean.
Mm-hmm.
It is knitted together with fungal mycelium, but it's mostly soybean. That's what these myceliated grain products are that they're selling
Wow.
as mushroom. They are actually fungal tempeh because they are selling you the grain that mycelium is grown on. And you're like, why are you selling me the grain? It is just basically grain powder, grain flour.
That's horrible.
I didn't ask for that. You're telling me it's a mushroom when it's not. So in my study, I did it in 2014, 2015, published
Mm-hmm.
it in a white paper. 40 of my samples were bought right off the internet of these products that were these myceliated grain products.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with this Megazyme test, it tells me the amount of beta glucans and it tells me the amount of alpha glucans. Alpha glucans are the starches, and alpha glucans can also be polysaccharides. So, using that test, I showed that mushrooms and mushroom extracts have 25 to 60% beta glucan and less than 5% alpha.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mushrooms don't have starch, for one, do
Mm-hmm.
not have starch. These myceliated grain products, they were the exact opposite. They were like 5% beta glucan and 30 to 60% alpha glucan, which is the starch. Well, for me, obvious, okay? Obvious because it's mostly grain in these products, and that grain powder is starch.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, these products were the exact opposite of what you were looking for, because what you want in a medicinal mushroom product, you want beta glucans. That's what makes mushrooms medicinal.
Mm.
That's the key compound in a mushroom. So here it is, and I'm like, wow. And I present this to the industry in general, and look, it changes the industry right away. And now so many different companies understand this, but these companies selling those products doesn't change them a bit. They still are out there selling these things. And the worst part about it is that if you look at the label of their product, it's got a picture of a mushroom.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got, a reishi mushroom, a shiitake mushroom. It's not mushroom. It is this myceliated grain product. If you're lucky, some of these companies, you turn it over and they might say mycelium. And in the other ingredients, what we call the fine print, it will say, brown rice or oats or something like that.
Right.
But the fact is that these products are actually mostly brown rice, mostly oats, and the amount of fungal matter is very small. And so we have a battery of tests that we use for all of our products. Our testing, because of our testing now, beta glucans have become a standard in the industry. So if you're ever looking for a mushroom product, make sure that they are saying on the label X amount of beta glucans on there, because that's what you're looking for in a mushroom product. And if it doesn't have it in there, it's not a genuine mushroom product. And the other thing to look out for, which is really interesting, is like a beta glucan is a polysaccharide. Mm-hmm. So traditionally, when they would measure mushroom products, and even when I was measuring mushroom products back in the 90s, it was all polysaccharides. And so a lot of products back then that I was testing from China were like really high in polysaccharide. And I think, oh, that's wonderful. It wasn't wonderful, because they could put in carrier materials which were polysaccharides. So a lot of herbal extracts come on some kind of a carrier, and usually it's maltodextrin. It's a polysaccharide. So these companies that are selling these so-called mushroom products will say, oh, our product has 40% polysaccharide or 50% polysaccharide. They don't say beta glucan, because they know their products are really low in beta glucan, but they can say polysaccharide because their products are high in starch.
Wow.
And mushrooms don't have any starch. So it's just like, holy smokes, it's a classic kind of bait and switch, where if you go onto their websites, they're talking mushroom, look at these pictures of mushrooms, look what we're growing, on and on and on. They're not growing or selling mushrooms. And it's just horrible to think about all the people that are buying these products thinking, oh yeah, I've got a great mushroom product here. And I have gone for a number of years to a trade show called Paleo FX. Mm-hmm. It's in Austin, a really cool show. And, paleo people, they're like carbohydrates, no
grains.
No grains. Can you imagine? No grains. And they come up to my booth and they're just like, man, mushrooms. So cool. I love mushrooms. I'm taking this great mushroom supplement. And I'm just like, oh yeah, well, okay. What brand is it? Mm-hmm. They tell me the brand, and I'm just like, oh man, I hate to tell you this, but that brand is mostly starch, grain starch. Oh, and they're just like shocked. And I feel so sorry for them, because there's so many people out there that have been fooled by this.
Yes. I'm one of them. So not only is it not even actual a mushroom, it's mycelium, but it's also diluted mycelium.
Exactly. Because, the thing about it is that they say, oh, these same companies say, oh, mycelium is so great. There's all sorts of tests out there and research on there showing mycelium has medicinal properties. I'm going like, yeah, you're absolutely right. Pure mycelium. Sure. You're not selling mycelium. You're actually selling grain powder with some mycelium in there. So all that research has nothing to do with the product you're selling.
Now, how much harder is it just to extract the mycelium itself as opposed to including the grain? I mean, so they're just grinding it. It's to save time, really.
Actually, if you're growing out that mycelium on the grain, separating it out is next to impossible.
Okay.
Yeah. And not only that, here's the thing, is that when you actually look at that, you can readily see that it's maybe 10% mycelium and the rest is grain. Now here's the thing. In China, they grow mycelium, pure mycelium, in liquid culture in huge tanks. You can do that. You can grow pure mycelium. So they do that in China, and they grow hundreds of tons of pure mycelium every year.
Okay.
So you can do it, but that takes a lot of infrastructure, and whereas growing out mycelium on grain in a lab is cheap, it's easy, doesn't take that much of an investment, not at all like if you're trying to set up something like a fermentation process with all these tanks and some way of heating the water and all the rest. I mean, it's a totally different and very expensive way to do it just to get set up.
I see.
So no, that pure mycelium is still good, not nearly as good as the mushroom. The mushroom is really like it is a biofactory for interesting compounds. And you were talking a little earlier about what actually the benefits that we're looking for in functional mushrooms.
Yeah.
And again, the very first benefit is going to be potentiation of the immune system.
Mm.
And man, who can't benefit from that?
Especially right now.
Especially right now.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And that's the thing that drives me over the wall, because it's like, why isn't anybody talking about prevention?
Yes.
Why isn't anybody talking about take vitamin D, everybody? Take a lot of vitamin D. If you're overweight, well, why don't you thin down, because you're in danger here? There are so many things that you
Yes.
could be doing. And look, for me, functional mushrooms, the key there is prevention. That's what you're using them for. That's why, and that's how they've been used in China. They're basically preventive. It's almost like taking a vitamin in a way.
Sure.
I tell people, for one, I say, don't expect to see benefits immediately. Some people are like, okay, yeah, they do feel stuff immediately. But I say, look, no, they're working in the background. You may not notice this until maybe a few months, maybe a year. And then you go, wow, I didn't get a cold this year, or I didn't get the flu, or I'm just not getting sick as much. Well, they're there. They're working in the background for you. And that's too where I'm also telling people, eat mushrooms, put mushrooms into your diet. Man, that is so important. I really feel like mushroom is the forgotten food and the missing dietary link. This is something where all of the studies that have been done out in Asia, where they take let's say 30,000 people, and they give them like, okay, what's your diet consist of? And they go through all of that, and they come out and they go, God, the people that are eating mushrooms actually are living longer than the people who are not. And I totally believe in that. Totally believe in that. I mean, look, I'm 100 years old. What do you think?
No, you do look great though. Have you been incorporating this in the vast majority of your adult life then, huh?
Oh man, yes, absolutely. I mean, when I was at the agaricus farm, I mean, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, the button mushroom, blah, blah, blah. I love the button mushroom. I don't care what anybody says. And I ate a ton of it, and really that, and then got the shiitakes and the oysters. I've been eating mushrooms in my diet for 50 years in a major way. Yeah. And I, like I say, I totally believe in the fact that mushrooms are a very, very beneficial food. And the interesting part about it is, when I started at the mushroom farm, nutritionists, classical nutritionists said, oh yeah, mushrooms, no food value. They taste good, but there's no food value. And it's like, why do you say that? No calories, no food value. No, that was totally wrong. We know now. A good amount of protein, 20 to 40%, mostly carbohydrate, but good carbohydrates like mannitol, like trehalose, slow acting carbohydrates. They're not starch. Starch, boom, just like that, right? No starch at all. This is like very slow acting carbs. And a lot of that too is fiber. And so high in fiber, and the beta glucans are there in that fiber. So very good food, high quality food, vitamin B1, 2, and 3, phosphorus, potassium. I recommend everybody get them into your diet before you even think about supplementation. Get mushrooms into your diet, make it a mainstay so that you're eating at 3, 4, 5. Garrett, like I do, how versatile mushrooms are, right?
Absolutely. They go with everything.
Everything. There's nothing that you can't do with them. It's an amazing, amazing food. So, for me, step one, eat mushrooms. Step two, okay, you want to supplement. Okay, there's reishi. That if there's one mushroom you want to supplement with, reishi, absolutely, because it's got these reishi and turkey tail have the right,
got the real mushrooms, reishi, full fruit bodies here.
That's the real thing. Yeah, and so reishi and turkey tail actually have the highest levels of beta glucans in our testing.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing that that's the case, because reishi is considered to be like one of the top mushrooms, functional mushrooms out there. Great mushroom. It also has these bitter compounds called triterpenoids that
Okay.
are very good for liver function.
Mm.
In fact, at one of the conferences I went to in the 90s, it was a reishi conference in China. I spoke with a traditional Chinese medicine doctor there, and he told me that reishi was his number one herb for the liver. Like,
Mm.
wow, that's saying something, right?
Yeah.
Number one herb for the liver. Damn, and you know how important the liver is, man. So and then other mushrooms that I say that are sort of in the category of being very powerful immunological potentiators would be maitake, would be shiitake, would be turkey tail. And then there are the other ones that are in kind of a different class, like lion's mane.
Mm.
You've probably never heard of lion's mane, right? Ha ha.
It's got a nootropic value, correct?
Yeah, I know. Lion's mane. It's so funny. Um, it's such an interesting mushroom, and kind of was an outlier for years and years and years. Like we didn't sell hardly any lion's mane at all 6 years ago, and then all of a sudden this nootropic category came up,
Sure.
and lion's mane filtered up into that, and everybody's like, oh my god, something that helps my cognition. I want it. And
Yeah.
today lion's mane is our top selling product.
Interesting.
Everybody in the world wants lion's mane. And 6 years ago, I probably sold 100 kilos in bulk of lion's mane. And last year, I think we sold 10 tons. I'm
Wow.
not kidding. It's just insane. So lion's mane has these compounds in it called hericenones and erinacines that will stimulate what's called nerve growth factor.
Okay.
Nerve growth factor is what we produce to actually stimulate the production of neurons as well as help to organize them. And um, so that particular benefit is something that, well, there's scientific clinical trials that have demonstrate that it has this kind of activity, and that's one of the things that's really missing for the herbal industry in general, are clinical trials, because everybody's like, oh
Mm.
well, unless there's a clinical trial, it's all anecdotal information.
Right.
Well, true enough, but nobody wants to really do the kind of, it takes a lot of money to do
Yeah.
clinical trials, so it's very difficult. But otherwise, there's good information out there, good research on it that seems to demonstrate that yes, in fact, it does have this activity, which is great. I mean, they've used it in some cases for early onset dementia,
Wow.
and just basic overall memory types of issues. And look, everybody could use help with their memory, especially as you get older. You're like,
Sure.
what'd you say your name was again? I forget. It's like,
Yeah.
God, wow, why can't I remember that word, or whatever it is, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so anything that can help with memory is really something good. So lion's mane kind of fits into that category. And then there's cordyceps.
Mm-hmm.
You ever seen the wild cordyceps?
I haven't.
Oh, damn. It is so cool. The wild cordyceps, the one that has been used, primarily as the traditional cordyceps, is called caterpillar fungus.
Okay.
This little fungus grows on a caterpillar.
I'll have to look
So
this
the
up.
so the caterpillar in the winter, as winter approaches, it burrows down into the soil and hibernates.
How
And
freaking
while it's
cool.
down there, over the winter, while it's down there, spores of cordyceps that are there in the soil will germinate on it and consume the whole insides of this
Oh
caterpillar.
my god. Wow, it's a carnivorous
Yeah.
fungus?
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
And so then in the summer, up comes this little cordyceps, which is like a blade of grass. So they call this herb in China, they call it winter worm summer grass. And so
Mm.
what they will sell in China there is they will sell the whole thing, caterpillar and all.
Wow.
Now, Garrett, think about this for a second. I'm at one of the trade shows and I've got a small little baggie of these things, and I'm going around. Hey, have you ever heard of cordyceps? And I'm showing them that, and they look at it and they go, "Wow, a caterpillar? Oh, yeah, well, that's part of the actual herb." Well, my customers are mostly vegetarians, and also I don't think they want to eat caterpillars. And it's like, okay, I get it. Hard sell. Today we actually cultivate cordyceps, and it's a different species called Cordyceps militaris.
Okay.
Awesome, and we can cultivate it, and that wildcrafted cordyceps is today $15,000 for a dried kilogram.
Wow.
Nobody can afford that. My God, back when I was first introducing it, it was like $1,000 a kilogram, which was still a lot of money in the supplement world. So today, I mean, they ultimately learned how to grow cordyceps. So today we're growing like tons of actual real cordyceps without any insects involved. So it's like, here's your cordyceps. No insects need to be consumed. And cordyceps was used traditionally for fatigue, for lack of energy. Somebody's got a illness. They're coming out of it, but they just can't make it over the hump. That's when they would prescribe cordyceps to people.
Okay.
So today it's used a lot with companies that are putting it out for energy, for athletic kind of products. That's kind of where the primary use is today. But it's also got all of these ones, lion's mane, cordyceps. They still have those benefits of the beta glucans as well. So they will still have the immunological activities. And those beta glucans and their activities, it's so broad spectrum. I mean, that alone just makes them like a power food and a power herb. I mean, it's just amazing the benefits that you're getting them. Now, finally, we've got chaga, which you and I talked about a little bit earlier, and how this gnarly looking growth that comes off a tree.
Yes.
And it's funny because if you go out on the internet, it's like chaga, the king of mushrooms. There's nothing it can't do. What do you have? It'll cure it.
Yeah.
Okay, what about this? It'll cure it. And I'm just like, oh my God, please shut up. This is not good. This is not true. It's not the king. Maybe it's a prince. I don't know, but it's not the king of mushrooms, and it's not a panacea. You know how certain things get sold as panaceas? It does everything. And you're just like, this sounds kind of like marketing speak.
Turns into
right?
pseudoscience.
Oh God, it's just horrible. Chaga is very good for people with stomach issues.
Yes.
They've used it traditionally as a folk remedy for cancers in Russia. I don't say that's something you should use it for necessarily if that's what you've got, but certainly for stomach issues, I think, man, that's what you should try. Try chaga. See whether it helps you with IBD or Crohn's or something like that. Maybe chaga would work for you, but that's really where chaga fits in. And it's one of those things too where I'm like, the king, well, let's see. In my career, I've met 4 different king of mushrooms out there. Literally in the 70s, there's a book written, Shiitake, king of mushrooms.
Wow.
And then in the 90s, all of a sudden people are like reishi, king of mushrooms. And then in the late 90s, it was like maitake, king of mushrooms. And I was like, why do we always have to have royalty involved anyway? Come on.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, it's this interesting trip.
Jeff, what I'm hearing and my takeaway is like for whole body, soul wellness, there's a vast different an array of different kinds of mushrooms that you can incorporate to really achieve that whole wellness, with the psilocybin for the spirit, and the chaga, and all these, the lion's mane for the mind, and the cordyceps. It sounds like by incorporating all of these, you can really achieve whole wellness.
Oh, I think it's definitely a part of that for sure. And look, let's be clear here. Like, I believe that the foundation for our health is diet.
Yes.
You've got to have a good diet. You've got to stop shopping in the middle shelves
Mm,
of the supermarkets, right? It's just like, don't go in there. Unless, like me, you go in, you get a can of black tomato, black olives or something, or some salsa or something like that. But otherwise, look, processed foods, stay away from them. You have to be active.
yes.
You have to exercise. I mean, there's so many parts of wellness out there, but diet is important, and having the right foods in your diet is super important. And the other thing about it is too is like all of our mushrooms are grown organically certified, and I consider that to be super important as well. We don't want to be consuming chemicals that we have no idea what the long-term effects of those are going to be. And
Right.
we live in a world today where who knows what we're getting when we're eating these different foods and vegetables and fruits. Who knows? I mean, it's just crazy. So we're certified organic. I totally believe in that. We have high quality German certifiers that certify all of our mushrooms in China. They're grown way back in the mountains, in really interesting outback areas. I mean, to get to them is quite a trip to get back there. And the growers that I work with are just amazing people. I mean, God, you look at these Chinese farmers, a lot of them using methods and techniques that have been developed over thousands of years, and it is just fascinating to see that how they're growing their rice and other vegetables and mushrooms. I mean, it's just amazing. And these are really people that are absolutely rooted in the soil.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I guess what I should have said is that they can be incorporated into the path of whole wellness because you definitely have work to do for sure.
Oh yeah,
Right? There's plenty of
yeah.
things that we need to do to get there, but that I've been blown away by this conversation, Jeff. It's been incredibly educational. You are a very inspiring and an excellent speaker and presenter, man. I'm so incredibly grateful. Thank you so much.
Oh, hey, you're very welcome. It's been my pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, this is going to be an episode that I'm going to listen back on and take notes. And your book and your supplement company. I'm subscribing now. I've got the five defenders here, and now this is you and your son, correct?
Yeah, yeah. My eldest son approached me about 6 or 7 years ago, and he said, "Hey, look, at that time he had a company selling iPhone cases, and I was always kind of like, okay, dude, that's great, but iPhone cases, really? You and how many other people, right?" And he said, look, I'd love to come into Nammex and work Nammex, and what I would really like to do is create a retail line. And
Mm,
I just went, oh man, this is so wonderful. Come on in. And in 2014, he went to China with me for the first time, introduced him to everything that was going on over there. And then he and I started and we worked on getting this line of retail products up and going, but it's been his baby, and he's really made it happen in a big way. And it's just so gratifying for me. And then my
yeah.
second son in 2018, who was a photographer and surf videographer, came to me and said, "Hey, I'm kind of ready to leave that, and can I get in too?" And I'm like,
Wow.
"Dude, you bet." So both of them work for me now, and it's just such a wonderful thing. I mean, it's just fantastic.
What better of a bond than to pass on your way of living on to them? And you guys are doing a huge service to the world. So I'm very grateful that you exist and that you guys have taken this journey and really look forward to seeing what becomes of it. As I've subscribed, I get these emails with once a week, I get a text that gives me an interesting fact about mushrooms. Uh, I get these very cool personalized emails and all these interesting facts, and it's been fascinating to me, so this whole door has opened up for me, and I'm hoping that that's what we can do with this episode, is really get more people interested into this subject.
Awesome. Yeah, because again, I really feel that mushrooms, like I say, they're the missing link. And
Yes.
that's what, people in Asia have known about mushrooms and have had them
Hmm.
in their diet for thousands of years. We're just catching up. So that's part of what's happening right now. It's just like with the psilocybe mushrooms. We're just catching up. In a way, I like to look at things and I say, hey, we're going back to the future,
Right.
right?
Yeah. And a lot of this stuff was cutting edge at one time, even in your lifetime, and then got shut down.
Yes,
So we're
exactly.
catching up again with the
Absolutely we
psilocybin in
are.
particular.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So it's very gratifying to me. And again, mushrooms have been a big part of my life, and I really, truly believe in their benefits.
Yes. Now, where can people find contact, or are you on social media and your websites? Well, let's plug those
Well,
in.
well, Nammex.com, Nammex.com, and that is the wholesale end of the business. And look, we've got lots of slideshows there that show how we grow our mushrooms, where other information. We've got a lot of educational information there. And also you can go to realmushrooms.com, and that's the retail side of the business. And there's also just a ton of great information there. So educationally, please come for that information because it's really great. And realmushrooms.com has got all the social media, and they've got their
Okay.
Instagram and everything like that. And um, so yes, definitely come to the websites and check it out.
Great. I will plug those in the description of the episode as well, and it'll be able to be found on Spotify, Apple, wherever it is people get their podcast. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Garrett, it's really been a pleasure. And man, that's a interesting looking cactus back
Oh
there.
yeah, we've got the Lophophora Freesia here. That's one of my favorite. It's actually a less active version of the peyote cactus. It's not as active as the Williamsi, but
Yeah.
in my opinion, it's the more beautiful variety, and it's got some pups coming out of it. And then this is like a mammal area. I've got a whole hoop house out in the yard full of cactus, and I got house plants, and then I've got my little mushroom grow too, where I'm experimenting. So
Awesome.
it's cool,
Awesome.
man. It's been a
Yeah.
beautiful experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. All right, everybody. Jeff Chilton. If everyone could please like, review, and subscribe to the podcast and hit that share button, I would appreciate that. Have a great day. Bye.